Hello, I'm Travis Fig, and this is How Do You Figure, the show about whatever I want. Today, I want to talk about the election and moving forward. As for the time of recording, Joe Biden is almost certain to be the next president of the United States. The Democratic Party has retained its control over the House of Representatives, though it has lost some seats. The fate of the Senate is still to be decided. Probably no one is ecstatic about this result, though from whatever your political perspective, you probably think it could have been a lot worse. Now, for the purposes of this channel, I've decided not to explicitly endorse political positions. That makes discussing this difficult. But there are a few things I want to talk about, related to politics and related to morality. Let's start with politics. Joe Biden can accomplish a few things through executive order. But in order to accomplish much legislatively, he needs congressional Republicans and Democrats to work together. Had Democrats achieved a significant majority in both the House and the Senate, then they could pass things along party lines. That's looking very doubtful right now. So it's important to look at what is Biden doing with executive orders and what are people doing legislatively. For all this, we need to ask, are these proposals helping people? Are they making people's lives better? Not perfect, not ideal, but better. So whatever Joe Biden does with executive orders, do they make people's lives better? And with the House and Senate, who is proposing legislation and who is blocking it? For the legislation being proposed, will it make people's lives better? And then if it won't, who's blocking it? If it will, who's blocking it? And that's how I think you should approach this. And again, I'm not endorsing any party here. I'm just making a basic point. If a certain piece of legislation will make people's lives better, that's a reason to adopt it, right? And if not, that's a reason to block it. So look what's being proposed. Does it make people's lives better? And who's trying to block it? It makes sense to block legislation that will make people's lives better, and it makes sense to endorse and help pass legislation that will make people's lives better. And I think that's obviously how we should approach this going forward. Now, morally, I want to talk about this because you see a lot of people talking about how we should come together and heal. And a lot of people saying they don't want to. Now, again, I'm trying not to take a position on this, but I want to sort of explain some of the thoughts here. People who say we want to heal, we should come together, they want us to be unified as a country in some fashion, right? We have political disagreements and we can all get along. The people who aren't ready for that, their issue is that they think that the Trump administration is immoral. They think it's not a political issue, it's a moral issue. And they think that if you continue to, they think that perhaps you got to pass voting. They'll say different things, but I think a lot of them will say perhaps you could get a pass voting for President Trump the first time because you could say you didn't really know what he was going to do. But the second time, you knew who Trump was. You should have known who Trump was, and you should have known that he was morally bankrupt. So for a lot of people who don't want to reconcile, it's because they think people who voted for Trump the second time were at least okay with moral bankruptcy. And that is a moral failure. Why? Every administration has its controversies. Every administration has to make decisions that have bad results. That's the way of the world. When you're in the position of the presidency, there are cases in which no matter what you do, people will suffer and die. That any choice you make will have some bad results. And you are almost certain to make mistakes. And that's not what this is really about. So I'm going to talk about three things that I think, there are others, three things I think people who have a problem with this are going to think about. One is the refusal to really strongly repudiate white supremacist groups. Now, it's just a matter of fact that white supremacist groups have felt emboldened over the last 4 years. You might say that's not Trump's fault, Trump is not responsible for that, and people can debate about that. But what Trump did not do was very strongly repudiate that when he had the opportunity. When he had the opportunities. So that's one. The next is the child separation policy. Now, we can disagree about how to approach immigration. That's a political topic we can discuss. I'm not going to bring it up here. But the intentional separation of children from their parents was not necessary to enforce border protections. And people who think there's a moral issue here will say that this was an unnecessary cruelty. There was no need for this. It was unnecessarily cruel. It was immoral. And finally, the response to the pandemic, particularly Trump's dishonesty. So we know from the Bob Woodward interview that Trump knew that the virus was coming airborne and deadly much longer before he admitted this publicly. We know that knowing these things, that it was deadly, that it was here, that it was airborne, while knowing that he said it wasn't a big deal, he said it would go away, he said there was nothing to be, basically very little to be concerned about. And a lot of people who don't want to reconcile are going to say that that was immoral. That sort of deception, which led to a great loss of life, was immoral. And supporting that Trump, knowing that he did that, was immoral. So people who don't want to reconcile, those three issues are things to think about. There are other things too, but those three issues in particular, I think, are things they're concerned about. And for them, this isn't about a political disagreement. This is about a moral failing. And supporting Trump the first time, maybe you get a pass for that because you didn't know what he was like. But supporting Trump the second time, you should know better. And and they're going to say that if you supported Trump the second time, you are guilty of an extreme moral lapse. And if we want to reconcile, if we want to come together, that's important for people to consider. Is what kind of moral issue, was there a moral lapse here? How can we try to deal with that? And that's going to be a difficult thing going forward. I think we need to try to do it, though.